is the failures of socialism that uses money at the same time that it exposes the weaknesses of capitalism. Now, going back to their book, what machines do to repeat is to bring an increase in production and an increase in the standard of living. They may do this in either of two ways. They do it by making goods cheaper for consumers, as in our illustration of the overcoats, or they do it by increasing wages because they increase the productivity of the workers. In other words, they either increase money wages, or by reducing prices, they increase the goods and services that the same money wages will buy. Sometimes they do both. What actually happens will depend in large part upon the monetary policy pursued in a country. Like our beautiful monetary policy. But in any case, they say, machines, inventions, and discoveries increase real wages. I'm going to refrain from laughing at this as much as I did when I read it in the book. This might have been true at one point, but at one time there was actually a work ethic that doesn't really exist anymore. And that work ethic stated that if you were doing well, then you shared with your people. You just don't do that anymore. I keep thinking, actually, and I would suggest, Peter, you should put this quote. I can't remember what the movie is from, but it had, I want to say, Michael Douglas, and it was talking about business, and this guy was giving a lecture to students. He says, greed works. Basically just glorifying greed. Greed works. Use greed in your business practices. Anyway, now I'm going to go back to my statements. This assumes, first of all, that an employer is just going to raise the wages he pays out because the worker's productivity is increased. As the ethics in business are overthrown by more and more creative applications, yet Wall Street, more and more creative applications of greed, the opposite is true. Outsourcing, more than anything else, proves that this entire notion is a fallacy. That's right, folks. They're not just going to raise your wages just because. And in fact, they're going out of their way to make sure that the opposite is true. Okay, now, let's talk about what outsourcing really is for a moment. Essentially, with the advent of superior technology, the worker has to compete with automated machines. An employer in a free market economy will have no regulations at all to tell them what they have to pay or what benefits or even living conditions their workers can demand, or working conditions for that matter. The corporate elite have already learned their lesson on how to avoid unions. Where do you find workers who are willing to work for whatever you will give them, that are satisfied with just enough money to survive? Will I be taking any calls later? Yeah, sure, I can do that. Especially if Peter will call. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. This is back to where you look for workers who are willing to do this. Okay. In nations that are desperate for any kind of work, Bangladesh, India, Mexico, and China, just to name a few, the workers in these countries are more than willing to accept substandard near-slavery lifestyle because it's slightly better than the starving-to-death lifestyle they had previously. That was kind of a gem. For more information, also, I would suggest that you read Walmart, or watch Walmart, the high cost of low prices. That was it, yeah. So that book, that movie totally details just how bad the working conditions, mostly in China. They go to China and they look at the working conditions of the people that work, for the companies that make stuff for Walmart. And they basically live like slaves. I mean, they live in really, really bad living conditions that they're forced to get, as in they take them out of their paychecks and everything. So I mean, you want to use some examples. They actually go there, they look at the working conditions, and that's even tame in comparison to some of the other stuff I've seen. But anyway, going back to my words, once again, the same as it was here in the United States during the Great Depression. This is once again, going back to the idea that, people are willing to accept the substandard near-slavery lifestyle because it is slightly better than the starving-to-death lifestyle they had previously. And the reason why, just like, during the Great Depression, Jacques Fresco's childhood, it is only a matter of time before the global economy that free trade creates will force Americans to accept the same standard of living as their competition, or have no jobs at all. Okay. Now, free market economists, of course, always justify this by saying, oh, but nobody is forcing these people to work for them. They could just go work somewhere else, as if people who live in impoverished nations have a choice. They have no choice of where they are employed they have no more choice of where they are employed than the people did during Jacques Fresco's childhood during the Great Depression. Scarcity of employment always leads to abuse of the workforce by the employers who realize they hold all the cards. This is exactly what was going on that caused labor unions to come into being in the first place. The only means by which labor could force companies to change their policies was to ask their political figures to pass laws to protect them or to strike. Striking would force the employers to straighten up or lose profits when their production is halted. However, once a certain level of poverty is reached, striking is no longer feasible. People living paycheck to paycheck cannot afford to stop working for any reason. Believe me, I'm doing that right now. To imply that workers can choose not to work and therefore not feed or care for their families is like implying that a gunman who is threatening your family is doing no wrong because you could always just choose to let him shoot them. Anarcho-capitalists, of course, claim that there is no coercion, but threatening to take someone's job and therefore their life is most certainly coercion. I remember a time in question when I had planned out a vacation, and my employer just decided that I was going to have to work, even though I had taken it off a year in advance. And they just hit you with the, if you want to have a job, you're going to have to do this, because they wanted to take a vacation. This is more of that dictatorship thing that Jacques Fresco talks about when he says that you subject yourself to that every time you go to work for somebody else. And that's an example. Yes, anarcho-capitalist is an oxymoron. More to the point, actually, I'd say that most of them are morons. Sorry for being so cruel. I am so tired of talking to those people. I spend pages and pages of it on the forums. And even a lot of anarchist friends of mine are sick of them. So, now, the choices are eliminated when the elite get together and work together to create a situation that collectively forces the labor force to accept a lower standard of living. It benefits Chrysler, for example, if they agree to work with Ford and GM to ensure that no worker can expect to be paid more than 50 cents an hour to make car parts. This is part of that thing, a concept I talked about in an earlier show that I call a cooperative monopoly. Okay, a cooperative monopoly is not a true monopoly, but this is because, remember, free market economists always say that monopolies can't happen in a free market. It's when a group of fat cats decide to get together and change the standard. Just like they did for the price of oil, they do the same thing for how much are we going to accept for this job. Okay. Now, technology also plays a serious part in this. There was a time when the overhead that would be added by sending our production overseas and then selling your products locally would be too much to make it worth it. Advances in shipping technology have long since eliminated this complication. It's just too easy now to outsource. Free market capitalists tend to blame all the problems of outsourcing on government regulation intervention, and they claim that without government these problems would vanish. The part that I always find hilarious about this contradiction is that these same people are often the same ones complaining about the fact that our government is owned and operated by corrupt corporations in the first place. The government is a corporate-owned institution. The notion that it is doing anything but facilitating the corporation's ability to exploit the common man and the workforce is absurd. It is equally absurd that this would just all go away without government. With no regulations at all, it only makes it easier to make having money more powerful, not less. The same is true of the media. Free market capitalists, of course, favor no regulation of anything, including the media. So if companies want to control public opinion, all they have to do is buy it in the form of radio and TV stations. Once again, being VTV, I'm going to recommend another documentary. Watch Orwell Rolls in His Grave or Outfoxed if you want to see about just how powerful this is. Those are two very good documentaries on the subject. This minimizes the ability of any politician intent on challenging the establishment, like my friend and mentor Senator Mike Gravel or Ron Paul or Dennis Kucinich, from ever getting elected to challenge them. It also keeps pesky news outlets from reporting it when their reports are found to be dangerous or created through inhumane work practices. I once did a feature on this. There was a episode of One Thing brought up as basically Fox News company. They did a show called The Investigators, and this group of people investigated this milk company that was knowingly putting bad hormones in the milk that would harm people. So the reaction of the milk company was to buy the TV station in question to prevent that show from coming on. You can find it on YouTube. I believe it's called Fox Exposed or Unbelievable or something like that. I'd have to find it again. I used to have it downloaded. I don't anymore. Now,